Welcome to Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, just to hear it out loud. Join Toby Malone and TJ Young, along with some special friends, as we puzzle our way through what we once thought was an unreadable book to produce a surprisingly listenable podcast. Hi everyone, Toby here. We've got a great episode coming up today. I'm just in the middle of editing it, and I just want to warn you that one of our guests has a few microphone troubles in the first couple of minutes, but I want to reassure you that these issues get resolved pretty quickly. So it's pretty hard to hear one of our guests early on, but it gets better. So hang in there because this is an unmissable episode. I really think you're going to enjoy it. We loved making it. So here we go. Welcome to a bonus episode of Wake, the podcast that's anything but drowsy as we stay perky towards fulfilling a long-held bucket list item, reading James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake out loud just once. I'm your host, Toby Malone, joined once more by the man who wrings more out of his waking hours than anyone else I know, TJ Young. Hi, TJ.
Hi, Toby. How's it going?
It's great. I'm really glad to be here. So, I'm wondering, what is your relationship with sleep?
Oh, me and her, we are not friends. I used to sleep a lot. I really did. But now I'm the type of person that regardless of what time I go to bed, my body wakes me up at 6 a.m., even if it's 2 a.m. But I also find that recently I have started to nap, which is great during the day, but it also makes it really hard for me to go down at night. So,
right. Okay. Very interesting.
It's something when I hit 35, my sleep schedule changed and shifted, and I'm still trying to navigate what that is. So,
right. Yeah. I've similar. I didn't like sleeping when I was a kid. I used to, my brain would turn on and not turn off, and then I'd turn into anxiety all night. And then now, sleep, I'm better with sleep, but the jet lag whenever I travel home to Australia is real. So that's, there's a lot to. And so the reason we're talking a lot about sleep today, obviously Finnegan's Wake is a big book regarding sleep, and we're going to get into a lot, but we're delighted today to be joined by two very special guests who are going to be elevating the tone of the podcast immeasurably into scientific terms. We have Professor Adrien Peyrache, who is an associate professor at the Montreal Neurological Institute at McGill University. See, I told you we were going to be elevating things. Alongside Professor Arjun Krishnaswamy, who is neural circuits researcher from the Department of Physiology at McGill University in Montreal. Welcome, professors.
Hi.
Thanks. Hi.
So glad to have you here. Arjun also happens to be my wife's brother-in-law, or he's married to my sister-in-law, whichever way you want to put it. I don't think we're technically related, but I think we're drinking buddies. It's at family events.
We can go with brother-in-laws, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, let's do it. Let's set that down. And he's also father of Nikhil Krishnaswamy, who read so beautifully on Wake a few weeks ago. Arjun, did you get a chance to hear Nick read?
I did. It was terrific. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he's such a remarkable kid.
It was surprising. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
Put me to shame. I was like, I've been working at this for months.
It's kind of you to say.
Excellent, yeah. And Adrian, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to Wake at all. You're a very busy man. Not at all.
No, sorry. No.
No, that's fine. Okay.
Fine.
The only reason
I will.
No, that's okay. Even if you just listen to this one, just to hear it back. But we just have fun here. And honestly, I think if I wasn't making the podcast, I'm not sure I'd listen to it either. So. So as I say, we're punching well above our weight here today, having you here on Wake. Both of you are world-renowned researchers with a particular focus in what goes on inside of our brains. Now, that's probably dumbing it down to the dumbest possible way. I'm really sorry to paint with such a broad brush, but is that about right? And tell me about your, like in general layman's terms, what your research is focusing on.
Sure. So basically my research since I started my PhD is to understand what is going on during sleep in our brains and how basically sleeping plays a key role in shaping our memories and basically making sure that our memories, become stable potentially forever, right? So we have new memories every day and many of them we will basically remember them for forever. And that's quite an amazing feat of the brain, right? Because we can do that although we are actually losing neurons every day. We do not create new cells in our brain. We actually lose cells, which is pretty sad. But fortunately, we're able to create new memories forever until like basically our last days of life almost. So yeah, and we believe that sleep plays a role in actually this process of creating and shaping these memories and making sure they're become. So this is one of the main things.
Wow, that's awesome. That's amazing. So you're saying that TJ's lack of sleep is a problem in terms of his future memories?
Yes, it is a problem. But the problem is that, like, this is something that, like, unfortunately many people experience, and it's not just for your memory. It's like, sleep is also extremely important for your entire body, for the physiological function of your body. This is this moment during the day when the body recovers, not only the brain, and so it's really important to have a good sleep hygiene as good as possible. And there are ways to actually improve your sleep quality. Then some people just don't need a lot of sleep and they're just fine. So it's not also a reason why you should be stressing out about like the lack of sleep. As we're aging, we don't need necessarily as much sleep as what we needed when we were like 15 years old. So
right, yeah,
be relaxed and try to improve a few things here and there.
Yeah, I always think about Arjun's and my brother-in-law, Robert, our wife's little brother. He used to just sleep all day. All day, he would just lie on the couch and for like 7-8 hours would just sleep, and then would be
amazing.
Up. Yeah,
it was amazing. I don't understand how someone slept that much.
It was crazy, and then he was up all night. So his sleep hygiene was
not great.
Well, he's a very intelligent man right now, so
yes.
So he turned out okay. And so, Arjun, your work is in a slightly different area of the brain, not necessarily to do with sleep, but you work with your mice. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I don't work on sleep per se, but for many years the lab has been studying in experimental animals. We've been trying to learn about the rules that neurons use to connect to one another and form what are called circuits in the brain. And so many of us neuroscientists think about the brain kind of like a biological computer. And if you can imagine in your head a picture of a motherboard of a computer, you sort of see all the little bits connected up to one another. And that's kind of how we imagine neurons connected in the brain. And they're connected to do certain things such as helping us see or helping us move, or I guess in today's podcast, helping us sleep. So we've been working on that. And then in recent days, we've become curious about the circuits themselves. So after they're formed, how do they work? And we study that process in vision. Yeah.
That's it's so fascinating. It's like just a whole other planet for where TJ and I come down as theatre people. Just hearing about these intelligent people doing intelligent things on things that are inside of our own heads. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of connection to any of this kind of science talk, TJ?
I mean, when I was growing up, I used to want to be a scientist. I went to a science magnet school and I studied like the preliminary of all this stuff. But, theater came up and bit me in the rear end and said, no, this is what you're going to do. Right. But, it's always been this thing where even now, as I am teaching college, I often tell my students, I'm like, I'd rather you go to sleep and wake up in the morning and reapproach the task, because there's just diminishing returns. And I can see that in their work. And I can also see that in my own personal work. I've never been the type of person to pull an all-nighter. It just doesn't make sense to me for a myriad of reasons. I'd rather lie down earlier, get up earlier, and try to knock out the task with like a refreshed brain and approach to things. That is when I get good sleep, when I'm like, there's something I need to do tomorrow. Let me go ahead and lay down. But even just I often run into students who are running on empty from this idea that I have to stay up till 4 a.m. to finish this thing. I'm like, you really don't. It's fine. Go to bed at normal time and just wake up a little bit earlier. But yeah, that's really I see it play out in my students every day.
So, Adrian, is there any benefit to an all-nighter?
No, actually, it really depends, like what you prefer. I mean, I'm the kind of person, I love working at night. I have a family, I have kids, so basically, of course, I have regular schedule now. But before that, I would love actually to be working until 4 a.m. and then sleep in the morning. I like in the morning, I'm of no use. It's really hard for me. So if you feel that you're better and better at your work in the morning, of course, go to sleep early, wake up early, and do whatever you have to do in the morning. But if you feel you're much better at night, do it. It's actually, there's a great diversity within the population in terms of like at where your peak performance is during the day. We all have our internal clocks. It's extremely complex, and for whatever reason, actually, we do not have basically the same phases. Even during life, actually, this phase, kind of shift during like teenagers. Actually, the shift towards like more usually more late hours at night. So this is why they actually have trouble sometimes getting to sleep, and the parents are like, oh, come on, stop using your phone, you should go to sleep. But actually, it's been shown now that their internal, what is so-called circadian rhythm, like their internal biological clock is shifted. And this is why actually there's been change in policies to shift start of school from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. In high school, for example. It's really important because it was absolutely making no sense to ask teenagers to be at school at 8 a.m. For most of them, it's extremely hard, and the first 2 hours of school, they were basically totally useless. So again, adapt adapt your schedule to your own biological clock, while still trying to keep something quite common, because you don't want also to lose any kind of social contacts, which matters also. I have students who show up in the lab sometimes at 1 or 2 p.m. I'm like, come on,
Yeah, yeah.
you're losing like a lot of things happening here, so please try to get here in the morning. I'm not asking at 8 a.m., but like before noon, please. Anyway.
But Adrian, you probably have the experience of friends in science. It's often the case that we have to share equipment when we do an experiment, and some people will be on the night shift, and they'll just. I remember that. I remember seeing people who come in at 5 p.m. and then they go.
So we had this issue in the lab, and the trainee was a postdoc. He thought he could do it, but after like a few weeks, you see the
Ah,
change in behavior, you see the change in mood, you see the change in focus and attention. I mean, it's not great. We should not impose this on anyone. And some people believe strongly that they can live, during at night, perhaps, but it's still better to see, sunlight.
So that, I mean, I guess sleep deprivation is, it's one of those things where, we connect it to drinking too much coffee at night, or to stress, or to, someone who, or staring at a cell phone screen, things like that. But it's also a form of, I mean, it's used as a form of torture in places where, leaving lights on all night in prisons. What does that do to the brain when you don't sleep for a long period?
Well, you die.
Right.
It's like, simply put, it's basically you're gonna die after just a few days of sleep deprivation. It's horrible. So you absolutely need sleep. Your brain needs to recover. And the exact reason is not necessarily obvious. There are actually, it's multi-factors here. It's like, first of, like, your neurons become more excitable. They're getting more and more excitable, and they need to realize, they need to recover. So the first few hours of sleep, like even just the first hour, is a key moment where basically all this excitation is relaxed. And some people know how to actually just focus on this sleep phase. For example, sailors, recently we had this crazy race around the globe. I don't know if you followed it. And these sailors, they know exactly how to sleep just for 10 minutes, the right amount of time, so that then when they wake up, they're back and they're focused. Okay. But this is absolutely necessary. During sleep, it's also the moment when your brain basically washes out all the the toxins, all the stuff, the garbage that basically accumulates during the day. And this is super important because you need a massive cleanup of all this garbage stuff. There are all these processes in the brain that takes place during sleep, and that makes it really important, and yes, after a few days without sleep, you're not in a good shape.
Yeah, my father was a soldier, and he fought in Vietnam, and he's better at napping than anyone I've ever met. He can sleep for 3 minutes, and will wake up completely refreshed. He'll just have a micro nap, and I always admired that. And then he would say, "Well, in war, you sleep when you can, and you don't get a chance to lie down for 6 hours. You have to sit down on a break and close your eyes for 30 seconds and then move on." So I guess that's a whole different kind of training of the brain.
So it learns, Adrian, like that when you fall asleep, it kind of learns. Our brains learn how to sleep in a shorter interval, or what's?
It's a great question. I don't know, but I'm sure that yes, I'm sure it does. You can train your brain to do basically whatever. And so if you train yourself like just having these micro naps, power naps, sure, then you'll get used to it. And it's a habit. It's a habit you learn very early on. And it's also the same thing. It's like kids. You think that we should put them like in a super preserve them from any source of noise and light. Well, actually, it's a good thing to learn to sleep in a noisy environment, unless it really basically, affect your sleep quality. But you have to learn also to not listen to all this noise and have a good night of sleep.
Yeah, I
Light,
guess.
light is a bit different. I mean, actually, no, light. It's good to have shade and really be in the dark, because then you can mess up your
Mhm.
internal clock. Anyway,
Yeah, go
One
on.
of the things that I have found recently that is I'm really good at, but is kind of problematic for what I do, is I can fall asleep in the middle of a theater show, no problem now. It's dark, it's comfortable. Usually someone's singing to me, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. But it's problematic when I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to respond to the show or say something. I will say, and Toby, you'll laugh at this. The couple times I've had to see Shakespeare shows, I'm like, I don't really like this scene, and they're not doing too great. So I can tell myself I have 4 minutes, and I'll just I'll just close my eyes, and then I wake up, and I'm like, cool, the scene's done, and I can move on.
to me, like one fascinating thing is like to ride the subway in Tokyo, in Japan, and you have all these people asleep, and they will wake up right at their station. So you look at them, they're like, they're gonna miss it, they're gonna miss it, and nope, like they wake up, whoop, get up, and I was like, oh my god, how did they do that?
Yeah, I guess we get used to the conditions around us because, I mean, if you grow up in a city and then you take a vacation in the countryside, then the quiet can be a problem. Whereas and then it can be the inverse. If you're used to very quiet times, then you go take a vacation in New York City and the sound of the trucks outside or the siren.
I lived for 5 years in New York City. I can tell you, my sleep was not great.
Uh-huh.
And then I moved to Montreal, and suddenly I realized, like, wait a minute, there's no noise outside.
Yeah, we live on a busy road in Toronto, and we have a streetcar that goes by 24 hours a day, and goes by every 4 minutes, and we don't hear it. So we sleep all night long. We just never hear the streetcar, even though it's right outside our window. But you get used to that, I guess. Yeah, and then some people like to sleep with the lights, with a nightlight, or it has to be in pitch dark. My son has to sleep with the door closed. My daughter has to sleep with the door open. Yeah, it's a interesting thing. It's so fascinating. Just why and like the question you ask, Arjun, about the brain learning is something that is I guess is part of both of your research about how it develops over. Do these things change over the course of our lives as we age?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything changes, and actually the way we sleep changes. For could get worse, could get better. You don't know. And like when we're talking about sleep quality, it's also like it's not. It's more complicated than that. Like some people have a hard time actually falling asleep. Some people fall asleep immediately, but they wake up early. Some people have fall asleep quickly, but they have a fragmented sleep. Some people believe they have extremely bad sleep, while actually when you record a full night of sleep, it's perfect.
Hmm.
This
Yeah.
impression that actually you have bad sleep because you wake up during the night, but normally you forget about it. You do not pay attention to the fact that you wake up. You open your eyes about 100 times every night. You don't remember that.
Wow.
And for a good reason. But there are some people, unfortunately, that become aware of that, and then they become absolutely sure that they have such a bad sleep quality, and you're like, no, everything is normal. And
Huh.
of course, there are the people who suffer, unfortunately, from severe form of insomnia, and then there are ways actually to help them. And but it's a big question. It's like also they believe that they're doing something wrong, while actually sometimes you just need to retrain your brain to get to sleep. We can talk about it if you want.
So when you're observing the brain in a clinical setting, I mean, there are obviously sleep labs that people go to. They get connected when they want to find out about the sleep apnea, and they people watch them sleep all night long, and which sounds horrible to me. If I had a group of people watching me sleep, I don't know if I'd handle that very well. But
You're alone in the room. Don't worry.
yeah, even so, just the pressure tonight. Have to have a good sleep or a bad sleep or whatever. But yeah, I'm just interested to see, if there are differences in the brain depending on if someone has had a sleeping pill or if someone has had melatonin or more caffeine, or if there's a baseline or is.
Sure. It's not necessarily systematic. And the problem, I don't know if it's a problem, but like your brain, my brain, everyone's brain is different. And not only it's different, it's like our sleep is different. So there are some universal, hallmarks of like what is brain activity during sleep. The brain generates this kind of peculiar, weird oscillation that you only see during sleep. And yes, the occurrence, the shape, these features may differ from one individual to another, but also they may differ whether you just coffee or sleeping pill before. The sleep architecture, exactly the amount of time you're going to spend in every sub-cycle or sub-phases of sleep will be different. Can I actually tell by recording a sleep whether you had coffee or a sleeping pill? My answer is certainly no. You cannot tell. If I don't have like a full recording from like hundreds of nights of sleep from you beforehand, I cannot actually answer this question. It's impossible.
I was
Sorry,
going
go
to say,
ahead.
I'm wondering how dreams kind of play into this, about how when we're sleeping, because I sometimes feel, and this could all be in my head, could be mental placebo, that I'm dreaming about a task, and then when I wake up, I have the ability to do the task more efficiently. Or when I used to run track, right? I used to have dreams about running, and I would go out the next day, and my form would be better. I was like, oh, I feel like I've improved overnight. And I'm wondering about how dreams kind of bridge that gap between what happens to our brains during sleep and also the way our brains are wiring in those connections that are made for us to execute while we're awake.
Yeah, that's a great question, and there are many things to cover here. So the first thing is, first of all, like what do we call dream, right? So of course we have all this idea of like dreams being this complex, very long, crazy narrative, And yes, these are the real dreams, and they occur mostly in one specific phase of sleep called rapid eye movement sleep. Basically, you're totally paralyzed, okay, and only your eyes actually are moving like crazy. And what is fascinating about this phase of sleep is that the electrical activity of your brain that you can record just with some electrodes is virtually indistinguishable from wakefulness. Is as if your brain was awake while the rest of the body is totally paralyzed. And this is when we have these crazy dreams, and this takes place mostly at the end of the night. So this is why if you're or asleep on weekends, you're gonna have these dreams because you don't have an alarm clock waking you up from like these phases of sleep, which is great. You also have dreams during the other phase of sleep called non-rapid eye movement sleep, which is more prominent in the early hours of the night. But it's not; these are not the same kind of dreams. They are like shorter stories, not as crazy narrative, right? But anyway, then the question is like, what is a dream? Well, the dream is somehow your own experience of what is going on in your brain. So your brain does all this crazy stuff. All these neurons in your brain are still active. They still do some operation. They actually may be processing memories and stuff. And you have this kind of virtual simulation experience of like what is going on in your brain. All right. So indeed, during sleep, your brain may rehearse, may repeat and again like things that you've learned recently, and continues learning during this phase of like inactivity, and you may actually have this, like, to use like a fancy word, like phenomenological experience of like, oh, I'm doing it again, and I'm actually living it in my dreams. But indeed, actually, when you wake up, you may actually be better at the task you were learning before. There's a famous paper in the field called "Sleep Inspires Insight," where they actually show that is that yes, during sleep you get better at certain tasks, not all, but at certain tasks. So a lot of things going on during your sleep, and indeed learning. But it's not that sleep necessarily does everything. It's like, you've been focusing so much on one problem, and you have all this information. And yes, during sleep, perhaps at some point you're gonna make this connection during a dream, and you're gonna wake up and you're gonna be like, wow, okay, I found it. But it's the same, and then many people are fascinated about these ideas. There are famous stories about Einstein dreaming about relativity. There are famous stories about Mendeleev dreaming about the periodic table of elements. But I'm like, usually it's like, okay, but do you want to know how many stupid ideas I had during sleep? And I wake up, I was like, woof, I was like really stupid. I'm like, okay, and there might be like a few good ones, but the vast majority of stuff that I actually dream about are totally stupid. So, what is happening really, I don't know. But yes, a lot of things are happening, and your brain is still very active. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And it really sort of links into why I invited you on today, just hearing about that state that we're in, because that's very much the state in which Finnegan's Wake happens. And so it's an interesting thing to transition us over to Finnegan's Wake a little bit, because that state that you describe is the setting for the book. And so Ulysses, which Joyce wrote first, is his day book, set on a single day, and we track one man around Dublin over the course of a single day. It's been said that Finnegan's Wake is the night book. And so this is the book that happens at nighttime, and Joyce basically was trying to describe what happens in our brains while we sleep. He said, he says, one great part of every human existence is passed in a state which cannot be rendered sensible by the use of wide-awake language, cut-and-dried grammar, and go-ahead plot. So the idea of trying to track dreaming, and we all dream. It's an interesting, or maybe we don't all dream. I guess that's interesting. Do we all dream? I mean, some people don't remember their dreams.
Exactly.
Right. And
so you all dream, but you don't necessarily remember them.
Right. So it's not as though people go to sleep and then there's a flat line of inactivity. I mean, if there was, they'd be dead, right? I guess. So we all dream, and we all have this very vivid kind of shared experience of going to sleep and then watching a movie that we feature in, that may or may not connect. But it's a really interesting thing about what it's looking at. And I just wanted to, I don't know, do you have any kind of familiarity with Finnegan's Wake? Have you read the book or
no? I read Ulysses, but I haven't read this one, and now I really want to. So I think I'm gonna order it right after this, recording.
Wonderful, fantastic.
Brace yourself. That's all I'm gonna say.
And Arjun, you've heard.
Well, and I have to admit, I tried to read Ulysses. I think I stopped halfway through. It was like it was tough.
Well, you read Finnegan's Wake and then Ulysses feels easy. And Archie, you heard that one episode that Nikhil was on, but
I haven't read the book.
So Yeah.
It was interesting, the passage he was reading from. So, I mean, some of the sentences or passages or whatever, they're just words, right? He's
They
just
are.
stringing together words and sounds. And
Hmm.
so that's the notion. That's the kind of dreamy notion he's evoking there, or
Yeah.
It's a mix of it almost feels like that it's a wave of in and out of consciousness where there are times where a mixture of sounds and ideas just kind of become an amalgamation of like one sentence paragraphs where there are actually four or five people talking with sounds going on in the background, and sometimes there are relatively clear ideas. I say relatively because the language is still bastardized and shifted around. And there's even a moment in the book where you can tell that they wake up briefly, and everything is like very concrete and very simple language, and then it slips back into that sleep. So it is it is everything and nothing all at the same time, in this like
Yeah.
really weird way.
And so I thought it'd be useful to give you a little sample. I'm going to give you a paragraph from Finnegan's Wake. The idea being that this is within dreams, so it is both. There are vivid moments, and then there are moments of great depth of different kinds of meanings. And so obviously, some things we dream of mean different things. But logic is not part of it, and meaning is not part of it. And so he flits from character to character and place to place and time to time, and it's supposed to represent all of human history. Joyce would said that if all of humanity was destroyed tomorrow, then you could rebuild it with Finnegan's Wake because everything is in here. Just listening to this paragraph in the context of a dream. This is from book 3, chapter 1. If anyone's following along on page 403. Methought as I was dropping asleep some part in non-land of Where's Please, and it was when you and they were we, I heard at 0 hour as 'twere the peal of vixen's laughter among midnight's chimes from out the belfry of the cute old speckled church, tolling so faint a good man true as knighthoods unseen, violet rendered all animated Great British and Irish objects, non-viewable to human watchers, save 'twere perchance anon some glistery gleam darkling adown surface of a fluvial flow and flow, as night mates as again might seem garments of laundry reposing a leaseward close at hand in full expectation. And as I was jogging along in a dream, as dozing I was dawdling, arrah, methought broad tone was heard, and the creepers and the gliders and flivers of the earth, breath and the dance tongues of the wood fires and the hummers in their ground, all vociferated, echoating, Sean, Sean, post the post, with a high voice, and oh, the higher on high, the deeper and low, I heard him so, and lo, miscern, some came of the noise, and some who might to move all murk. Now 'twas as clump, now mayhap, when look was light, and now 'twas as flasher, now more'n as the glow. So, so dreaming, and so the logic of dream. I mean, what happens in our brains? Like, there's obviously no logic here. That I mean, this is very common where we'll dream and we'll jump from thing to thing. I mean, what's going on in there when we dream?
I want to me, there's something that there are many things fascinating about dreams, but one thing that I really still can't believe actually is the fact that we talk to people. You're actually talking to yourself, right? It's your brain.
yeah, sure.
Right.
And you talk to people and you're surprised by their answers sometimes. You're like, why are you telling me this? I'm like, wait a minute. This is me talking to myself here. Like, what is happening? It's like, isn't it crazy? Anyway. I also want to get back to what you said right before reading this paragraph. And apparently what Joyce said about everything is in this book. And this is fascinating. Why? Because the way we study sleep ourselves in the lab, we're doing exactly like Arjun. We're doing it in animals, very quantitative science, trying to understand brain activity during sleep. And one key idea is that sleep is a window on cognition when it's basically unaffected by external sensory inputs. meaning that whatever we see in the brain during sleep reflects all the realm of possibilities. Like it's the whole knowledge is there, like the whole structure is there, and anything that you will see during wakefulness is a subset of what you're going to see during sleep. Sleep is basically shows you what is possible, but during wakefulness you only basically influence these internal states, and you're going to basically explore some of these substates, right? Nothing that will happen during wake is not present during sleep. It's the opposite. And we see actually that activity in the brain is highly constrained. It's not random at all. Neurons are organized in a certain manner, and this is what we're trying to understand. So it's fascinating that they actually say that is that yes, everything that is in dreams actually you can use it to reconstruct everything that we know. Like the whole knowledge is there. Okay.
Wow.
The third thing and last thing I wanted to point out, and I don't remember the name, but I think it was a psychiatrist somewhere who actually said something that I think is really interesting. He said that the stories that are the best, like that are the most, how to say, compatible with dream activity, with like the narrative of dreams, are the one that are really impactful to humanity. It's basically the narrative of our dreams is the true narrative. Like if you're writing a story, it should be compatible with the structure of dreams, because this reflects the way we tell ourselves stories. Right. And this is deep. This is really deep. It's that it's not only about like all the weird stuff. No, it's basically the way we tell ourselves stories, because we build stories during our dreams.
Huh. And the fact that Finnegan's, I mean, there's multiple characters in Finnegan's Wake, but all of them represent, all of them sort of meld into each other and morph into one another, and different characters represent different kinds of parts of historical figures and people in society, and whereas the idea that it's a single dreamer. Although Joyce has said the dreamer is all of humanity, but if you reduce it to a single dreamer, then the fact that you have a single character representing multitudes makes all that sense, and all the possibilities are there, exploding out and exploding down. That's incredible. That's awesome.
So maybe I want to ask, like, in your reading just there, I mean, one of the feelings I get that it is a dream is in a local phrase, it makes sense. One word and it's surrounding 5 or 6 words. You feel like, okay, it's going to make sense. But then as you read, let's say 6, 7 words down the line, that made sense, but not with the previous part. Like it was like some weird flowing thing. So, Adrian, I guess when people do these things, where he can say more about it, but basically there are experiments to watch how an animal dreams. In some cases, you can see, let's say, a mouse or a rat run a maze thousands and thousands of times in its dream. Does it sort of fit with that? Are there breaks in the running of the maze where he goes off and does something else and then comes back? Does it have that fragmented quality to it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So again, without getting too much into details here, during the real dream phase of sleep, like the rapid eye movement sleep, which basically we see also in rodents, in our mice, and our rats, we do see them moving virtual environment. We don't know exactly what they're doing, but we can decode actually movement as the animal was moving around, and we see it. Okay, which is pretty cool. And when, like during the rapid eye movement sleep phase, they move at the same speed as if the animal was awake. So you dream in real speed. You dream in real time. There is this other phase of sleep, mostly at the beginning of your night, the non-rapid eye movement sleep. There, things go much faster, about 10 times faster. And then this is when we see actually a lot of memory replay. We see that the brain replays recent experiences extremely fast. And yes, and in a discontinued manner. It's like a burst of activity in which you replay some trajectory, then you have some silence, and then there's another burst which is quite disconnected from the previous one. And so here you basically have these flashes of memory of virtual experiences that are quite disconnected from each other. So it's somewhere, I would say, in between. Rapid eye movement sleep, things are pretty continuous, even if sometimes you have breaks, and like chapters. I don't Have you ever had this feeling that during like a long dream you have actually different chapters?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, totally
Hmm.
right. So that's it. It's like it's the end of the chapter, new chapter, and we see it actually in the brain activity. It's like continuous for like few tens of seconds, which will basically be several minutes in humans, and then you have this weird thing happening, and it starts over somewhere else. Yeah.
Adrian, why do I have a memory of my dreams at all?
Because you are interested in it, and the more you actually recall your dreams when you wake up, the better at recalling them or remembering them you're gonna be. It's a well-known fact. How and why I don't know, but people will basically, or if you wake up and you start writing about your dreams and you do it days after days, you're gonna get so much better at remembering your dreams. It's a known fact.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I rarely remember my dreams. But maybe I
Wait,
should
wait a
try.
minute. What were you saying before then? Like, what was your question? I thought you were.
No, I like rarely remember them, but when I do, they always stick out. They turn out to be like
Okay, so
usually not such a pleasant dream. Uh, but I
It,
always
it
wonder
also
why I
depend.
thought.
It also depends, like when you wake up, because if you naturally wake up after the end of a dream, which is basically what is happening. So again, some physiology here. A sleep cycle is about 90 minutes in humans. It starts with non-REM sleep, transition into REM sleep when you're gonna be dreaming, and at the end of it, you wake up. Like for a few seconds, you open your eyes and you go back to sleep. But if it is like the fifth cycle and it's already in the morning, you're gonna wake up like with all the memory of your dream still like super there. And then if you wake up and you start thinking about it, you're going to remember it because you just woke up from your dream. If you have an alarm in the morning, like weekdays, this alarm may actually turn on in the middle of non-REM sleep, and it's going to be like, oof, what is happening to me? You were not dreaming at all. So it really depends on so many things. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the scenario where you wake up and you think, I remember my dream and it feels very consequential and I'm going to describe it to someone. And then halfway through the description, you realize
It
this
makes no
doesn't,
sense
it
to
makes no
anybody.
sense. And this is actually not important to you. Or it felt more important to me because it was inside of my brain as opposed to something you saw on television. Um,
Yeah, and I'm always wondering, like we all have this experience. I totally agree. And then you start telling your dream, and you realize that it's actually not very interesting to others. And basically, but if I were a great storyteller, I'm sure I could turn it into interesting stories. It's just that I'm this is not my job, and I'm not good at it. So I'm sure, like writers, are so good at doing it, and or painters were basically, Dali, who started to actually paint like
mhm.
whatever, clocks that are melting from his dream.
Well, I can tell you that as someone who has woken up and been like, I'm going to write my dream down. As a writer, I've gotten 4 sentences in and be like, this is nonsense. No one cares. No one cares. Like,
But there was something I wanted to bring up that came from. So you have a terrific talk that's available on YouTube called "Sleep's Hidden Superpower," which you really enjoyed watching and gave us a
Thanks.
really interesting perspective into your work. And then we'll post this on our show notes. But one of the things that really I took, I mean, obviously a lot of what we talked about today is incorporated from that talk. But one of the things that I found so fascinating is you talked about the compass in the thalamus, the fact that we have this little GPS in our brain that shows us when we're upright and when we're, where we're pointed, but it keeps spinning while we're sleeping. So we're laying still, but our body thinks that we're walking around with this little compass. Is that a too
Absolutely.
simplistic way of putting it? I'm not sure if
Yeah,
that.
basically, all animals have like a brain compass. They have a group of neurons actually at different places in the brain. They're all like it's an interconnected network that basically tell the rest of the brain what is the orientation of your head in the horizontal plane. Okay, and it's super important to navigate, it's super important to actually anchor yourself in the external world. And like right now, like my head is facing this laptop, this camera. I have a group of neurons that that fire, that are electrically active, continuously telling my brain this is the orientation of my head. Now I turn my head 90 degrees, and there's another group of neurons that basically tell my brain, nope, now I'm facing this way, and I'm coming back to this direction, facing my camera, and the same group of neurons that was firing right before now fire again. Okay. So you can record these neurons like in rodents, in mice, for example, in our lab. And what we realize is that the animal is falling asleep, and this, we call them the head erection cells. They fire as for the direction of the head as the animal is falling asleep, and suddenly they sweep. Suddenly they start spinning around, and they start spinning around like one full turn, and the animal like wake up and falls back asleep, and it's a turn, and suddenly you see all the transition into sleep, and when it's real sleep, continuous sleep, then it spins around super fast, as I was telling you before. Remember, I say during this phase of sleep, the first part of a sleep cycle, non-REM sleep, things go much faster, and we see these compass neurons, they turn like crazy, and suddenly you enter REM sleep, and you see these head erection cells, they stop, and they start moving again, but now exactly as if the animal was awake at the same speed.
Hmm.
And they do it, for like rodents, it's gonna be like at most 1 minute. This is how long a REM sleep is for a mouse. And you see for 1 minute, like this random walk, and you don't know what is going on. The animal might be dreaming of like exploring some environment, and you see it. And you see it also in other places of the brain spatial navigation system, which is sometimes more complicated to decode, because either you need more neurons when you try to decode spatial position. It's higher, like in mathematical term, it's higher dimensional, because it's easier to decode, just an angle in this brain compass than in the places of the brain that code for your position in space. We know that there are maps in the brain that code really for where you are in the environment, but you need so many neurons to precisely and reliably decode where you are that sometimes it's just untractable. With this head erection cell, at least we have a system where we can decode everything, as long as we record like few tens of neurons, which we can technologically we're able to do that. So yeah, this is what we're studying, and how it relates to memories. Of course, as you can imagine, it's even more complicated than what I said. There's like all sort of processes. Sometimes it stops, sometimes it accelerates, and we actually realize that that it may have actually some precise function for memory processing during sleep.
And is this the sort of thing that so when you are falling off to sleep and then you dream that you trip or fall and then you jolt yourself? I mean, is that connected here, where you feel as though you're about to fall down and so you wake yourself up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so, but I think there are two components here. One is that you fall asleep, and sometimes, yes, you have this feeling of like your head spinning. I think this is directly related. Um, but there's also, when you have this muscle, movement, like, jerks of your legs. And this is, I think, something else, which I believe personally, and I don't know if like many of my colleagues will agree with that, but this is one of the best explanation of consciousness. What is consciousness? Because you have this muscle, like movements, which are spontaneous movement when you are falling asleep, and your muscle are not just effectors, right? They're not just driven by some brain neurons. They also are sensors. They tell the brain constantly in what state they are, and suddenly you have this spontaneous movement, and you have all this information, going up to your brain, and your brain receive all this information. It's like, what the heck is happening? Why am I moving now? And he actually makes up a story, because this is what your brain do all the time. And when you're awake, the story that your brain makes up usually, are in pretty, let's say, agree with the real words. It's like it makes up story, but this is the most probable story. And you say, yeah, this is exactly what happened. I was falling, like, I was like sliding on the street or whatever. But during sleep, no, you're in your bed, but your brain is making up a story of like, oh, I just fell off. Like, no, you're just in your bed, everything is fine. But he has to make up these stories, and consciousness is maybe just that, like this constant need of the brain to make up story, which eventually actually are are compatible with what is happening outside, and you're like, yep, this was the most probable thing, and this is exactly what is happening.
That's crazy. Well, it's funny because there's this one person show that I teach sometimes. It's called Milk of Amnesia, and it's this person talking about how she slowly forgets how to get to her childhood home over time, and how she's like, I could get to the street, and then I could get to the next street over, and eventually I can only get to like the shop that's 5 blocks away. But she's like, I lose that memory, I lose the directionality of like where this was. And she talks about it in the fact that she used to be able to dream her way there, and now she can't anymore. And like, I'm also thinking about the way that artists have found a way to like capture this scientific phenomenon in words and tie it to emotion. And when you just explained it to me, I was like, it all makes sense. And my brain is slowly melting out of my ears as I take on new information. But yeah, it's all very fascinating, and it's actually putting the book into context for me in a way that continues to fascinate me, because James Joyce didn't have the internet. He didn't have, a professor of dreams and sleep. Like, they're dictating to him, like, this is what happens in the brain. But it's still, like, it gives context to the way the book flows and moves. And even the disorientation sometimes within the text makes sense within that scientific explanation.
But it's good not to have too much, scientific content. Christopher Nolan's, blockbuster Inception is a great movie. Of course, I love this movie, but there's something fundamentally flawed and wrong about this movie, because it assumes that dreams takes place 5 to 10 times faster than real life, which is wrong. Because as I told you, now we know you dream in real time, and it was basically inspired by the discovery that memory replays is faster. But these are not real dreams as is depicted in the movie. These are just flashes of like past experience, but like bouts of experience, not the kind of narrative that he basically shot in his movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had like a long conversation and debates with some of my colleagues of like whether Inception was scientifically true or not. There are counter arguments to that.
At the end of the day, it's like, no. But
it was a pretty good movie, though.
It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
So we can't dream something that we've never experienced, or that we don't know about. You couldn't dream about an alien species that actually existed because you hadn't seen it.
That's okay. Let's rephrase this question internally. Can you actually imagine a color that you've never seen?
No, I guess not.
No, right? It's like, what does it even mean? It's like, no, like we cannot do that. So can we dream of things we've never seen? Well, actually, yes and no, because it's constrained about like all the knowledge we have of the world, of like what people are, of like it's constrained by language a lot, of course. But the experiences themselves are new. There are things that like we never experience, these narratives, like these stories, but constrained about like all the knowledge we have of the world. We have internal models of like what are social interaction, what is a house, what is like the world, that the sky is above and the ground is like below. All these are like all the prior knowledge we have about the world, and yet these constrain necessarily somehow the sleep. But at the same time, this is what is fascinating about dreams, because some of these rules, some of these principles sometimes are broken, and it's what makes them so fascinating. It's like, oh, this thing happened, that was crazy.
But so you're saying just new mixtures of pre-existing knowledge, which can sometimes feel very new.
But have you ever dreamed that you were flying?
A few times, yeah.
It's amazing, right?
It
I guess the best experience I've ever had. I was flying. Have you ever? Did it ever happen to you to fly? Actually, no.
No.
Well, I guess not, right? So I was literally dreaming something that felt so natural during my dream. I was flying around, and it was like, oh my god,
so
this is so simple. Why is it the first time I'm thinking that actually I could do that?
so can maybe kind of related to the book. Can you say something about why all of us can understand each other's dreams? Like, is it? It says that it kind of reinforces what you mentioned in the beginning, that this is it's something the machine does, and everyone's machine is kind of the same, and that's why we all kind of dream the same. Is that right? Like, the reason Joyce's book works is because we can all look at it, and if we're told, if someone like me who doesn't read complicated things is told this is about a dream, it feels like a dream. Is
Right.
that
Yeah.
why?
Yeah. No, it's yes. There must be some, universal structure, and it comes back of like either a universal narrative of stories, and I think this is something we share as a species, uh, sharing the brain, which even if our brains are, highly different, as I said before, your brain, my brain's not the same. We do share, like I think, some structure, and it goes beyond like the idea of like universal language, like Chomsky ideas, blah blah. I think there's like a common structure of like what is a narrative, and this is why you can read stories from many different cultures and from cultures that were not interacting at the time, and it always makes sense.
Okay,
It
so it's an
always makes sense
extension.
to us as humans because I think it's an extension of like what is a narrative, and especially, I mean, this is also these stories that actually survive like centuries or millennia are the one clearly that were the most transmitted between individuals, and very likely they were transmitted so well and so reliably across generations because they are necessarily these particular stories had something deep about like a common narrative structure that basically was speaking to everyone, and then it basically brings the idea, it's like, is it related to some core structure of like what is a good story, and it might actually be reflected in the structure of our dreams. There's something here to think, which is quite which is, yeah, again, which is fascinating, but yeah. So this is why perhaps actually you can tell me about your dream, and I can reflect, I can interpret part of it, or I can understand, or I can read like a dream content and say, oh yeah, this is definitely a dream.
Hmm.
There's something here. I don't
Yeah,
know.
and I think that's what Joyce was going for in this. In that is that he was looking for that universal experience, where Ulysses is based on the Odyssey, and it's one man walking around Dublin, in a city that most people had never been to. So that's not a universal experience necessarily. Whereas everyone sleeps and everyone dreams, and he from our friends at the Finnegan's Wake Extensible Elucidation Treasury website, there are 244 references to sleep in Finnegan's Wake. There are 167 references to dreaming and 575 references to night. It's sort of a foundational element to this book in that even when it's very rare, there's only one occasion where the dreamer wakes. And it happens in the third book, where in the middle of the night he wakes up after a bad dream and then goes back to sleep again. He's soothed back to sleep. Um, but there's very few references to the fact that it is a dream. It's very trying to render it as something that's really been experienced. And so Joyce said, in writing of the night, I really could not use words in their ordinary connections. Used that way, they do not express how things are in the night in different stages, conscious, then semi-conscious, then unconscious. I found that it could not be done with words in their ordinary relations and connections. When morning comes, of course, everything will be clear again. So that really sort of feeds into this idea that the superpower of sleep, that they're washing our brain in the best possible way of going through all of this sort of stuff. find that really interesting. It's sort of a
Cool.
very primitive approach to what
Yeah, it's cool.
you're talking about. He was writing in the 1930s then, but he was also devastated that people didn't understand. People just didn't get Finnegan's Wake, and it was universally hated, and he was despondent with the way that the critics attacked it. Even because he thought he was writing about something everyone would kind of relate to, even though it was very complex.
Sure.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting is that I think this helps us uncover. There's a question that comes up all the time in wake scholarship, which is, who is the dreamer? Because the dreamer is, someone sleeping in a bed, and it's usually rendered as either the protagonist, which is Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker, and so HCE is a character who exists, and he's the main sort of central focus, and he has a family, and he represents different sort of things. There's also Tim Finnegan, the man who falls off a ladder and dies, and that's where we get the name of the book. But the interesting thing is there's more than 80 languages included in Finnegan's Wake, and at the moment when the dreamer wakes, he's soothed back to sleep by his mother speaking in Esperanto, which is a created language. And so the fact that we have 80 different languages and basically infinite depth of knowledge probably suggests that it's not a single person dreaming, because no single person has that knowledge. It's humanity who has that knowledge. It's all of the world connected together.
It's a large language model.
Toby once tried to put a section of Finnegan's Wake into ChatGPT, and it was like, nope, sorry about it. I'm not going to do it.
What was the prompt? Like, what was the question?
I think he asked, like, what does this section mean? And it was like, no.
Yeah, and then we have a friend on Blue Sky who is creating a large language model to try to recreate Finnegan's Wake, and it's
wow.
I'm not sure how well it's going. I think it comes out as something that is along the same lines, but doesn't have the same kind of depth. Because Joyce will give you a word, and then you'll go into Fweet, our guide, and there'll be 16 different meanings for that one word, and that was intentional, and the reason why he creates it like this way. So that depth of meaning, where you might dream in metaphor, where something represents, fighting a big dragon, and that dragon is your boss, and dealing with the stress of the day, is one thing, but the idea of having all knowledge connected all together, that you can unpack is Finnegan's Wake is a large language model. You heard it right here first.
But please send me the account, the Blue Sky account. Yeah, I'm interested.
It's fascinating. I mean, the other thing that happens quite 10 different times in Finnegan's Wake is that there are claps of thunder that happen outside of the house while the dreamer is sleeping. There's a storm outside, and there are 10 different occasions where there are thunder words, where thunder happens, and then the thunder is incorporated into the dreamer's dream as 10. Each of these words have 100 letters in them each, and we know them as thunder words. So what is that when we incorporate outside stimulus into our dream, and then like when you listen to the radio in the morning, and suddenly the newscaster's voice becomes part of the person you're talking to, for example?
So Freud actually said that dream is the guardian of sleep. It's basically if your brain realize that he shouldn't be waking up, he's gonna incorporate this external stimulus in his internal activity in the dreams to protect actually the sleeper. The dreamer is actually he's protecting himself from the external world so that he stays asleep. And we can discuss about the real biological meaning of all this, but there's some truth in that, is that we're extremely good as we're asleep at detecting, salient external stimulus. I mean, if you have kids, all parents know that you hear half a second of a baby crying or making whatever noise, you're gonna wake up, check what is going on. There can be thunder outside. I will not wake up. I have a really good sleep, right?
Mhm.
And your brain can process the things. Say, do I have to wake up? Do I have to wake up the whole brain, or do I keep it for myself? And the way to actually make sure that you don't wake up is like, oh, that is gonna be part of the dream, and is gonna be part of
Mm.
these internal stories.
Hmm.
And the dreamer, which is the ego, myself, basically say, oh, this noise is something natural. Does it make sense? I don't know what it means really. Like, what is
Mhm.
like biologically speaking, what it means. But yes, that's very certainly this is what is happening. You're
Uh,
influenced by external world, but you will be dreaming without any sound outside. So it will be all like internally generated still.
yeah, that's it's really interesting to get these sort of confirmations of things we've been talking about, but from a scientific perspective. It's so wonderful. There is a book out there called Joyce's Book of the Dark that was written by John Bishop, that sort of breaks down feeling awake by the dreams and by the hour you go through, and you can sort of track where in the night you are and things like that. And which is interesting, but it's we tend to not do any research on this podcast, so we haven't read it, but we will point our readers towards it, because it's interesting that these things we can unpack. This is the thing about Joy. He said, so it took me 17 years to write this book. It should take you 17 years to read it.
This is so arrogant.
It's so arrogant. He actually wrote it with the intention of immortality, in that people would read it for the rest of all time, because it was impossible to fully unpack. But yeah, but it's so interesting that he's placed it in this universality of sleep, that we all have this, and so it gives us a really good starting point. And then you can excuse anything you don't understand, being like, it's a dream. I don't always understand my dreams.
We do a lot of that. We do as we're like, sure, great, sure.
Yeah.
And we know, like, for example, what you're saying is super interesting, and we know that many of the paintings are actually in caves, like, from 10, 20, 30,000 years ago. For example, Lascaux in France. Very likely these are paintings that are inspired from dreams.
Hmm.
And there's one evidence for that, is that there's this very famous painting in Lascaux in France, where this actually, when you look at it, this is a bit weird. This is like, there's a bird on the back of a buffalo, but things do not make sense. Like, this is not a real scene. And there is this human, actually. So basically, the painter at the time kind of or depicted himself, or actually himself. And the reason why we have some idea that actually was asleep, that this human on the painting has an erection.
Really?
And we know that during REM sleep, men and actually female, even if it's less visual, have erection.
Yeah. Well,
that also explains the extremely sexual nature of this book.
Yes.
Don't let Finnegan's Wake fool you. It is filthy.
So actually, it's a good remark. Some people have looked into it, and I don't remember exactly the argument, but it seems to be actually quite unrelated. It's unrelated for whatever reason. I don't know if it's actually something everybody agree on. I don't know. But I read at some point, I remember, say, no, there's it's not because you have this physiological phenomenon happening that necessarily the content of your dreams is sexual, even if they can be.
Yeah, it's all so fascinating. There's so much to unpack, and I feel as though we could talk about this for hours. Although you are both very busy professors, and I want to make sure you can get back to your day, even though it is the morning time, so your least productive time. Yeah, look, this has been so interesting, and we're so thrilled. I mean, you're giving us all sorts of podcast cred right now, because you're giving us all this amazing insight that makes our podcast look very legit. So we're very grateful for that. Yeah, we'll leave it there. But it's been terrific. Thank you so much for your insight and your being able to explain this in such an accessible manner to us theatre people who
Thanks for having us on.
Of course.
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
This
absolutely.
was really fun.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's great. Like just the work that you're doing is so important, and you're actually making a difference in the world. And yeah, we're going to direct our readers to our listeners towards your to your work because it's so very interesting. But thank you. So that is all the time we have this week for Wake. We'll return next week to continue with our reading as we finally get our way into book 4. I've been Toby Malone, joined as ever by TJ Young. Thank you, TJ. I hope your brains haven't melted too far out of your ears with all that.
Oh, you know what? I'm just
amazingness.
glad I don't have to teach today. I'd be worthless. So,
It has been an amazing pleasure to have Professors Adrien, Peyrache and Arjun Krishnaswamy join us. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate you helping us untangle some of these mysteries. And I'll link to both of their labs in our show notes. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week, sleepwalkers and sleep talkers. This has been Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, just to hear it out loud. If you've made it this far, thank you for your dedication. Join us next week for another segment of Finnegan's Wake and a chat about what we've found. Wake is a Moon Street Media podcast, engineered by TJ Young and Toby Malone. Our theme song is The Ballad of Perso Riley, arranged and performed by Meg Logue after James Joyce. Wake is recorded in Canada, where Finnegan's Wake is in the public domain. For community and bonus content, join us at our free Patreon at patreon.com/wakepod. If you have questions about Finnegan's Wake, don't ask us. We're just as confused as you are. See you next week.